The helicopter blades chopped through mountain air as Staff Sergeant Renata Kovac checked her gear for the third time. The CH-53 lurched through another pocket of turbulence, and across from her, Corporal Davies gripped his rifle tighter. She caught his eye and offered a slight nod. He returned it, but his knuckles stayed white on the weapon. Lieutenant Hayes stood near the ramp, one hand braced against the frame, studying a tactical map on his tablet. His jaw worked methodically on a piece of gum, the same rhythm he maintained before every insertion. Renata had done 4 missions with this force recon team, and Hayes always chewed spearmint before they dropped. Before we continue deeper into this operation, drop a comment and let us know what state you're watching from. Maybe you have military bases or mountain terrain like this near your home. The crew chief held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes to insertion. Renata's mind shifted into mission mode, cataloging every detail the way she had been trained. Not the training Hayes knew about. Not the training listed in her Marine Corps jacket. The other training. The one that had consumed 18 months of her life at a facility that did not officially exist. Hayes moved down the line, checking each team member. When he reached Renata, he had to raise his voice over the rotor wash. Your sector is Northeast Quadrant, standard recon protocol. Stay within radio range and report every 30 minutes. Understood, sir, Renata replied. She did not mention the enemy patrol patterns she had identified in the pre-mission briefing. She had noted the inconsistency in their sweep schedules, the gap that appeared every 6 hours in the Northeast Quadrant. Hayes had dismissed it as irrelevant variation during the briefing. Maybe it was. Maybe it was not. The helicopter banked hard, dropping altitude. Through the open ramp, Renata could see dense forest canopy rushing up to meet them. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still holding onto winter snow despite the late spring date. This was border country, the kind of terrain where 3 nations met and none claimed responsibility for what happened in the spaces between. 30 seconds, the crew chief called out. The team stood as one, checking weapons and adjusting pack straps. Renata felt the familiar weight of her gear settle across her shoulders. 65 pounds of equipment that she had carried through worse terrain than this. Through jungles that try to swallow you whole. Through deserts where the sun cooked thought from your brain. Through urban environments where every window held potential death. But Hayes and his team did not know about any of that. To them, she was just another Marine, someone who had transferred into force recon with decent scores and adequate performance reviews. Someone competent but unremarkable. Someone who followed orders and stayed in her lane. The helicopter flared, hovering 3 feet above a small clearing. Hayes went first, dropping and rolling. Davies followed, then Martinez, then Chun. Renata went last, hitting the ground and moving immediately to her assigned sector. Behind her, the helicopter was already climbing, the sound of its rotors fading into the mountain morning. The team formed a defensive perimeter, weapons out, scanning their fields of fire. Renata swept her sector, noting the sight lines, the dead spaces, the routes of approach and egress. Her breathing had already settled into the deep, controlled rhythm that lowered her heart rate and sharpened her perception. Hayes gave the hand signal to move out. The team began their patrol in a staggered column, maintaining tactical spacing. Renata took her position in the formation, her boots finding purchase on the forest floor with the unconscious precision of someone who had learned to move silently before most people learned to drive. The forest was old growth, thick with underbrush and fallen timber. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in scattered shafts, creating patterns of light and shadow that shifted as they moved. Birds called from the branches above, their songs marking the team's passage. This was still neutral territory, still safe. That would change. Martinez raised a fist. The team froze. He pointed to tracks in the soft earth near a stream bed. Boot prints, recent, moving east to west. Hayes examined them and checked his GPS. He looked at Renata, his expression questioning. She moved forward, crouching beside the tracks. 4 individuals, moving at patrol pace approximately 2 hours ago. The depth and spacing suggest combat load. She touched the edge of one print where morning dew had not yet fully evaporated. Closer to 90 minutes, she added. Hayes nodded and signaled the team to continue. They crossed the stream and climbed the far bank, angling deeper into the forest. Renata's mind worked through calculations she could not share. The patrol they had just crossed had been moving perpendicular to the enemy's established pattern. That meant either a routine adjustment or a response to intelligence about American activity in the area. Either possibility mattered, but Hayes would not want to hear her analysis. He had made that clear on their second mission together when she had suggested an alternate infill route, and he had told her to stay in her lane. So she stayed in her lane. She walked her sector. She maintained her interval. She kept her radio checks brief and professional. And she watched everything, cataloging details that might matter later, building a mental map of this terrain that went far beyond what their GPS and satellite imagery could provide. The team moved through the forest for another hour, climbing steadily into rougher country. The trees began to thin, replaced by rocky outcroppings and scattered brush. Harder terrain to cross, harder terrain to hide in. Hayes called a halt in a depression between two ridgelines, a natural position that offered concealment and fields of fire. Davies and Martinez took security positions while Chun checked the radio. Hayes spread his map and motioned for Renata to join him. "We are here," he said, tapping the map. "Your recon sector extends to this ridgeline. I want eyes on that valley by 1300 hours. Standard protocols, regular check-ins. Questions?" Renata studied the map. The ridgeline Hayes indicated was the one she had identified in the briefing, the one that sat in the gap of the enemy patrol pattern. She weighed her words carefully. "Sir, reconnaissance of that sector might benefit from a delayed approach. Enemy activity patterns suggest increased presence during midday hours in that specific area." Hayes looked at her, his jaw still working that piece of gum. "Source for that assessment? Pre-mission intelligence review, sir. Communications intercept analysis indicated routine patrol concentration in that valley between 12 and 1400 hours." Hayes folded his map. "Our intelligence says otherwise, Sergeant. The valley should be cleared during that window. That is why we are tasking it now. Are you questioning the intelligence assessment?" "No, sir. Just noting a potential discrepancy worth considering." "Noted," Hayes said, "but we are proceeding as planned. Move out at 12:30. Report by 1300. Clear?" "Clear, sir." Renata moved back to her position and checked her gear again. Her hands performed the ritual automatically while her mind worked through contingencies. Maybe Hayes was right. Maybe the intelligence was solid and her pattern analysis was seeing ghosts in the data. Or maybe something had changed in the last 48 hours that neither the intelligence analysts nor Hayes had accounted for. Either way, she would know soon enough. In 90 minutes, she would be on that ridgeline, looking down into that valley. And if the enemy was there when they were supposed to be somewhere else, things are going to get complicated very quickly. Renata moved through the forest with deliberate precision, her boots finding solid ground on instinct developed through thousands of hours in hostile territory. The ridgeline rose ahead, its rocky spine cutting against the afternoon sky. She had left the team's position 20 minutes earlier, and already the forest had swallowed any evidence of their presence behind her. The terrain grew steeper as she climbed, forcing her to use her hands on the larger boulders. Her rifle stayed slung across her chest, accessible but secure. Every few meters she paused, listening to the forest, letting its rhythms tell her what moved through it. Birds still sang. Insects still buzzed. Nothing had disturbed the natural order of this place. Not yet. She reached the ridgeline at 12:57, 3 minutes ahead of schedule. The position offered excellent observation of the valley below, exactly as the mission planning had indicated. Renata settled into a natural hide between two large rocks, their weathered surfaces providing both concealment and stable support for observation. Through her binoculars, the valley stretched out in detail. A narrow stream cut through its center, bordered by open ground that would be fatal to cross under observation. The far side rose into another ridgeline, this one covered in the same dense forest she had just climbed through. Perfect terrain for an ambush. Perfect terrain for a trap. She keyed her radio. Overwatch 1, this is Recon 3. In position at checkpoint Delta. Valley appears clear. No movement observed. Hayes responded immediately. Copy, Recon 3. Maintain observation. Report any changes. Renata settled into watch, her breathing slow and even. This was the part of the work that separated trained observers from exceptional ones. The ability to watch without watching, to let your peripheral vision catch movement while your focal attention remains soft. To become part of the landscape rather than an intrusion upon it. 15 minutes passed. The valley remained empty. Maybe Hayes had been right. Maybe her pattern analysis had been overly cautious. Maybe the intelligence was solid and she was jumping at shadows. Then she saw them. Four figures emerged from the tree line on the far side of the valley, moving in tactical formation. They wore mismatched combat gear, the kind of equipment that came from a dozen different sources and conflicts. But their movement was disciplined, professional. These were not militia fighters playing soldier. These were trained combatants who knew their ground. Renata keyed her radio. Overwatch 1, contact. 4 hostile personnel, far side of valley, moving northeast along the streambed. Combat équipe, tactical formation. Copy that, Hayes said. Continue observation. Do not engage. 2 more fighters emerged from the trees, then 3 more. They were conducting a patrol sweep, moving with purpose toward something specific. Renata adjusted her position slightly, getting a better angle on their route of march. They were heading directly toward the ridgeline, where her team was concealed. Overwatch 1. Hostiles now 9 personnel. Moving directly toward your position. Estimate 15 minutes to contact. Say again your count. Hayes' voice had an edge now. 9 hostile personnel, confirmed. Combat équipe, discipline formation. They know this terrain. This appears to be a deliberate patrol route, not random movement. Stand by, Recon 3. The radio went silent. Renata watched the patrol continue its advance. They moved well, using cover, maintaining intervals. Whoever commanded this unit had trained them properly. The lead element reached the stream and began crossing, weapons up, covering each other's movement. Her radio crackled. All elements, this is Overwatch 1. We have hostile patrol approaching from valley. Prepare to displace north on my signal. Recon 3, begin movement back to Rally Point Alpha. Negative, Overwatch 1, Renata said quietly. Hostile patrol has forward observer element approximately 300 meters west of my position. Direct route to Rally Point Alpha will compromise my position and expose my movement to observation. Then find an alternate route. Hayes snapped. We need to consolidate the team. Renata was already scanning for options when she saw them. More fighters, emerging from positions she had not even identified as potential hides. They had been there all along, waiting in perfect stillness while she watched the valley. While she watched the obvious patrol, she had missed the concealed Overwatch positions. It was not an enemy patrol. It was an ambush net, and her team was walking directly into it. Overwatch 1, this is not a patrol. Repeat, this is not a patrol. You have multiple hostile positions in prepared ambush configuration. Count now 15 plus personnel with more likely concealed. Recommend immediate displacement west, not north. Negative, Hayes said. Intel shows western route blocked by terrain features. We move north as planned. Sir, western route is viable. I can see it from my position. Northern displacement will put you directly into their kill zone. Sergeant, you will follow orders. Rally Point Alpha now. The radio went dead. Renata looked down at the valley, at the net of fighters now moving into final positions. She looked north where her team would be starting their movement. The mathematics of the situation were brutally simple. Hayes was leading them into a prepared ambush because he trusted intelligence over the eyes of the operator on the ground. She had seconds to decide. Follow orders and try to link up with a team that was about to walk into withering fire. Or trust her training, the training Hayes knew nothing about, and find her own way through this. The first shots cracked through the forest before she could move. Automatic weapons fire, multiple positions, the distinctive sound of an L-shaped ambush triggered at close range. Screams and return fire echoed through the trees. The professional calm of the enemy fighters below her position never wavered. They held their sectors, maintained their discipline. They had done this before. Renata grabbed her radio. Overwatch 1, report status. Static answered her. Then Hayes' voice, tight with pain. Contact. Multiple hostiles. We are pinned down. Chun is hit. Martinez is hit. We need immediate support. Give me your position. The radio erupted with overlapping voices, the chaos of men fighting for their lives. Renata heard Davies screaming for a medic. She heard the distinct bark of enemy weapons closing in. She heard Hayes trying to coordinate a defense that was already collapsing. Recon 3, can you provide covering fire on our position? Hayes' voice had lost its command edge, replaced by desperation. She scanned the terrain between her position and the sounds of battle. 500 meters of open ground, followed by dense forest where the ambush was occurring. By the time she covered that distance, it would be over. One way or another, it would be over. Negative, she said into the radio. Not possible from my position. You need to break contact and displace south. We cannot move, Hayes gasped. Too much fire. Chun is down bad. We need extraction. We need air support. We need something. The firing intensified. Renata heard the distinctive thump of a grenade launcher, then the explosion. More screaming. The enemy was not just ambushing them. They were systematically destroying the team. She made her decision. Overwatch 1. I am moving to flank hostile position. Hold what you have. 5 minutes. But even as she said it, she knew 5 minutes was a lifetime in combat. She began moving down from the ridgeline, using terrain to mask her displacement. Behind her, the sounds of battle continued. In front of her, the forest waited, full of enemies who had just proved they owned this ground. Her radio crackled one more time. Hayes' voice, barely audible over the gunfire. Recon 3, if you cannot reach us, save yourself. Do not let them take you. Do you understand? Do not let them take you. Understood, Renata replied. The firing reached a crescendo, then began to slacken. The sounds changed from the chaos of a firefight to the methodical shots of an enemy consolidating their victory. Renata heard voices calling to each other in a language she understood but was not supposed to know. They were counting bodies. They were searching for survivors. They were looking for the American woman they knew had been with the patrol. She moved deeper into the forest, away from the killing ground, her mind already shifting into a different mode of operation. The mode her instructors had drilled into her during those 18 months. The mode that took over when you were alone, behind enemy lines, with nothing but your training and your will to survive. Hayes and the team thought she was trying to link up with them. Command would soon believe she had been captured or killed in the ambush. Everyone would make reasonable assumptions based on reasonable expectations of what a force recon Marine could accomplish alone in hostile territory. None of them knew what she actually was. None of them knew what she could actually do. And that ignorance was about to become the enemy's worst nightmare. Renata moved through the forest like water, finding its course, each step deliberate, each pause meaningful. The sounds of the ambush had faded to occasional shouts as the enemy consolidated their position. She was 300 meters from the killing ground now, far enough to avoid immediate pursuit, close enough to monitor their activity. Her left shoulder throbbed where she had impacted a tree trunk during her rapid displacement. Not serious. She had taken inventory of her condition while moving. Bruised ribs on the right side. Shallow cut on her forearm from a thorn branch. Minor dehydration. Nothing that would compromise her operational capability. Pain was just information, and right now it was telling her she was still functional. She found a natural depression beneath an outcropping of rock, a space barely large enough for her body, but offering concealment from 3 sides. Renata settled into it, her rifle positioned for rapid engagement, and forced herself to be still. Completely still. The kind of stillness that required conscious effort to maintain, that fought against every instinct screaming at her to move, to act, to do something. But stillness was a weapon. Stillness was survival. Her instructors had made her practice it until she could slow her heart rate on command, until she could breathe so shallowly that movement would not betray her position, until she could become part of the landscape itself. Through the trees, she heard voices approaching. Enemy fighters, moving in a search pattern. They were speaking in rapid bursts, the kind of tactical communication that indicated training and experience. She counted at least 4 distinct voices, probably more further out in the sweep line. One voice rose above the others, giving commands. The language was one she had spent 6 months learning at that facility that did not exist. The commander was telling his men to expand the search radius. The American woman had been reported in the valley. She could not have gone far. Find her alive if possible. Dead was acceptable, but find her. So they knew she was female. That meant they had been watching the team longer than just today. That meant intelligence had been compromised at some level, probably before the mission even launched. Hayes and his team had walked into a trap that had been prepared specifically for them, and now the enemy wanted to collect the full prize. 2 fighters passed within 20 meters of her position, their boots crunching on dead leaves and small branches. One of them paused, looking directly at the outcropping where she hid. Renata's finger moved to her trigger, applying the first pound of pressure on the 5-pound pull. If he took 3 more steps, if he decided to investigate the shadow beneath the rocks, she would have no choice. The fighter stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably 15 seconds. Then his companion called to him, and they moved on, continuing their sweep pattern toward the east. Renata released the pressure on her trigger, but kept her finger indexed alongside the weapon. That had been close. Too close. She waited another 10 minutes after the voices faded before allowing herself to move. Her radio remained clipped to her vest, but she had not transmitted since Hayes' last message. Any transmission would give away her position. The enemy would have radio direction, finding equipment. They would be listening for her signal, waiting for her to make contact with command or her team. Her team. Chun and Martinez had been hit in the initial volleys. Davies had been screaming for a medic. Hayes had been coordinating a defense that could not succeed. By now, they were either captured or dead. Most likely captured. The enemy had executed that ambush with precision specifically designed to overwhelm and capture rather than annihilate. They wanted prisoners. They wanted intelligence. They wanted proof of American presence in this disputed territory. Renata checked her watch. 14:37 hours. The ambush had occurred at 13:21. In another hour, when the team failed to make their scheduled check-in, command would start emergency protocols. Search and rescue would spin up. But this was hostile territory, and SAR operations would take time to plan and execute. Minimum 12 hours. Probably 24. She had to assume she was alone for at least the next day. Had to assume no rescue was coming. Had to operate on the assumption that she was the only American asset in this entire mountain range, surrounded by an enemy force that knew this terrain intimately and had just proved their tactical superiority. Most Marines in her position would focus on evasion and escape, move away from the enemy, find a place to hide, try to make contact with friendly forces. That was doctrine. That was training. That was what Hayes would expect her to do. But Renata had received different training. Training that started with a simple question her instructor had asked on the first day at that facility. If you were alone behind enemy lines, surrounded by hostiles who are hunting you, what is your primary mission objective? The obvious answer was survival and escape. That was what most students said. The instructor had let them believe that for about 30 seconds before delivering the actual answer. Your primary mission objective is to make the enemy regret that they did not kill you immediately. Renata shifted position slightly, easing the pressure on her bruised ribs. She began conducting a detailed assessment of her resources. Rifle with 6 magazines, 180 rounds total. Pistol with 3 magazines, 45 rounds. For fragmentation grenades, 2 smoke grenades. Kumbakniv. Multi-tool. First aid kit. Water purification tablets. 3 days of rations. Night vision device. Thermal monocular. radio that she could not safely use, GPS that would give away her position if activated. Most importantly, she had something the enemy did not know about. She had 18 months of training specifically designed to turn a single operator into a force multiplier behind enemy lines. She had learned to move unseen, to strike without warning, to create chaos and fear in numerically superior forces. She had learned to hunt. The enemy was searching for a frightened Marine trying to escape. They were looking for someone running, hiding, desperately trying to survive until rescue arrived. They were not looking for a predator. They were not looking for someone who had already decided that survival meant going on the offensive. Renata pulled out her topographical map and studied it in the fading light. The enemy had multiple positions scattered across this area. The ambush site, the observation posts they had used, supply routes to support those positions, a command element coordinating everything. They had infrastructure, they had logistics, they had patterns and routines, all of which made them vulnerable. She traced her finger across the map, identifying likely locations for enemy encampments, water sources they would need, terrain features that would provide natural defensive positions, routes they would use to move between positions. The same intelligence analysis she had tried to share with Hayes, the same pattern recognition he had dismissed as irrelevant. The sun was setting now, painting the forest in shades of orange and shadow. Night would bring advantages and disadvantages. The enemy would have night vision equipment, but probably not as sophisticated as what she carried. They would be confident in their numerical superiority, which would make them less cautious. They would assume she was hiding somewhere, terrified and alone, waiting for rescue that might never come. Let them assume. Assumptions were vulnerabilities. Assumptions got people killed. Renata checked her gear one more time, then began applying camouflage paint to her face and hands. The ritual was calming, methodical, a physical manifestation of the mental transition she was making. The Marine who had followed Hayes' orders up that ridgeline was gone. In her place was something else, something her instructors had spent 18 months creating, something the enemy was completely unprepared to face. She finished the camouflage and looked at her reflection in the screen of her turned-off GPS. A face divided into irregular patterns of green and black stared back at her. The eyes in that face were calm, calculating, patient. The eyes of someone who had stopped running and started hunting. Renata settled into her hide and waited for full darkness. Somewhere out there, the enemy was celebrating their victory, counting their prisoners, reporting their success to higher command. They had executed a perfect ambush. They had captured or killed most of an American reconnaissance team. They had dominated the battlefield. They thought the battle was over. They were wrong. The Tactical Operations Center at Forward Operating Base Granite hummed with controlled urgency as Major Caldwell studied the digital map display. Red icons marked the last known positions of Hayes and his team. Timestamps showed the progression of the mission until everything went silent at 13:21 hours. Captain Voss stood beside him, holding a tablet with the mission brief. Sir, last radio contact was Staff Sergeant Kovac reporting hostile movement in the valley. Lieutenant Hayes acknowledged and ordered team displacement. Then we lost all communications. Caldwell traced his finger along the map. What about the scheduled check-in at 1400? Nothing, sir. We attempted contact every 10 minutes after that. Dead air on all frequencies. Drone coverage? Voss pulled up imagery on the main display. We had a bird overhead at 1500 hours. Thermal signatures show approximately 20 to 25 personnel in the valley area. No movement. Appear to be consolidating a position. We identified what looked like a casualty collection point, but we could not confirm identities from that altitude. Caldwell felt the familiar weight settling onto his shoulders. For Marines, including one of his best junior officers, had walked into something in those mountains. The question now was whether they were dead, captured, or still fighting. What about Kovac? Her last position? Voss highlighted a section of the map. She was here, on the ridgeline overlooking the valley, approximately 500 meters from where the team made contact. Her final transmission indicated she was attempting to flank the hostile position. Attempting to flank, Caldwell repeated. Alone, against an unknown number of hostiles. Yes, sir. That was the last we heard from her. Assessment? Voss hesitated. Sir, given the tactical situation, numerical superiority of the enemy force, and the time elapsed since last contact, I would assess Kovac as Kia or captured. Most likely captured. The enemy clearly had advanced intelligence on our patrol. They would want prisoners for interrogation and potential propaganda value. Caldwell studied Kovac's personnel file on his tablet. 29 years old. Force Recon qualified. Solid performance reviews. Nothing particularly remarkable in her jacket beyond competent execution of assigned duties. She had transferred into his unit 6 months ago from a training assignment that had lasted unusually long but carried no special designations. What do we know about her background? Caldwell asked. Voss scrolled through the file. Standard Marine career progression. Infantry initially, then reconnaissance pipeline. She spent about 18 months at Quantico in some kind of advanced training program. Details are pretty thin on that period. Just says specialized reconnaissance instruction. 18 months is a long time for recon school, Caldwell observed. Yes, sir, but her orders show she was attached to the training command for the duration. Probably an instructor pipeline or curriculum development. Caldwell made a note to look into that later. Right now, he had more immediate concerns. Get me Colonel Briggs at regiment. We need to start SAR protocols and get intel working on identifying that enemy force. I want to know who just ambushed my Marines. Yes, sir. Voss moved to make the calls. Caldwell returned his attention to the map, to those red icons that represented 4 of his people somewhere in those mountains. Hayes was young, but competent. Chun and Martinez were solid Marines. And Kovac, whoever she really was, had tried to warn them about the enemy patrol pattern. He pulled up the radio logs and read through Kovac's transmissions leading up to the ambush. She had identified the hostile movement. She had warned Hayes about the ambush configuration. She had recommended an alternate displacement route. Hayes had overridden her on every point. Caldwell sighed. Hayes had followed the intelligence assessment and standard doctrine. He had made reasonable decisions based on the information available to him. But Kovac had been on the ground, eyes on target, and she had seen something everyone else had missed. Now she was missing too. His phone rang. Briggs on the line, his voice carrying the gravel of 30 years in the Corps. Pete, what have you got for me? Caldwell gave him the situation report, keeping it concise and factual. 4 Marines, missing following enemy contact. Last known positions in disputed border region. No communications for over 3 hours. Enemy force estimated at 25+ personnel, well organized and equipped. Briggs was quiet for a moment. Kia, or captured? Unknown, sir. Drone footage suggests casualties, but we cannot confirm. Given the tactical execution of the ambush, my intel officer assesses high probability of capture. Another pause. All right, I am authorizing SAR operations. But Pete, you know this terrain? You know the political situation. We cannot just send birds into that airspace without clearance, and clearance is going to take time. How much time, sir? Best case, we have authorization for insertion in 18 hours. Realistically, probably 24 to 36. State Department has to coordinate with 3 different governments just to figure out whose territory we would be violating. Caldwell felt his jaw tighten. Sir, if they're captured, 36 hours gives the enemy a lot of time to move them out of the area. I know that, Briggs said, his voice heavy, but my hands are tied on the timeline. Get your SAR package ready to move the second we get clearance. And Pete, prepare yourself for the possibility that this turns into a recovery operation instead of a rescue. Understood, sir. The call ended. Caldwell looked back at the map, at those red icons that might already represent dead Marines rather than living ones. He thought about Hayes, about how he would write letters to 4 different families if this went the way he feared it would. Voss returned to the operations center. Sir, regiment confirms SAR authorization pending. We should have clearance within 24 hours. I have alerted the Quick Reaction Force. They will be ready to launch on your order. Good. What about intel? Any identification on the enemy force? Voss pulled up another screen. Preliminary assessment based on tactics and equipment suggests a regular military unit, possibly special operations. The ambush was too well coordinated for militia forces. They had prepared positions, good communications discipline, and they executed a textbook-shaped ambush, which means they had advanced intelligence on our patrol route and timing, Caldwell said. Yes, sir. Which means we have a serious security problem somewhere in our planning cycle. Caldwell nodded slowly. That was a problem for later. Right now, his focus was on the 4 Marines in those mountains. If they were alive, if they were captured, every hour that passed decreased their chances of successful recovery. He thought about Kovac again, about that 18-month training assignment that was just vaguely described in her file, about how she had spotted the enemy patrol pattern that everyone else missed, about how she had tried to warn Hayes and been overridden. Sir, Voss said quietly, do you think any of them made it out? Caldwell studied the terrain on the map, the dense forest and broken ground where a skilled operator could potentially evade pursuit. He thought about what he would do in that situation, alone and surrounded by hostiles who wanted him captured or dead. If anyone made it out, he said finally, it would be Kovac. She saw it coming. She tried to warn them. And according to the logs, her last transmission was about flanking the enemy position, not evading it. Voss looked at him skeptically. Sir, respectfully, 1 Marine against that size force would not stand a chance. If she tried to assault their position alone, she would have been killed or captured within minutes. Probably, Caldwell agreed. But there is something about her file that does not add up. 18 months of training for a standard reconnaissance assignment. The way she identified that patrol pattern. The fact that she recommended exactly the right tactical response, and Hayes shut her down. What are you thinking, sir? I am thinking, Caldwell said slowly, that maybe Staff Sergeant Kovac is not exactly what her personnel file suggests. And I am thinking that if she is still alive out there, the enemy might have gotten more than they bargained for when they sprung that ambush. Voss did not look convinced, but he did not argue. Yes, sir. I will keep monitoring all frequencies in case she tries to make contact. Do that, Caldwell said. And pull everything you can find on that training assignment at Quantico. I want to know exactly what kind of specialized reconnaissance instruction she received for 18 months. He turned back to the map, to those mountains where 4 of his Marines had disappeared. 24 hours until they could launch a rescue. 24 hours for the enemy to exploit their prisoners. 24 hours for Kovac, if she was still alive, to survive alone in hostile territory. Or 24 hours for her to do whatever it was she had really been trained to do. Caldwell hoped he was right about her, because if he was wrong, they were about to launch a recovery operation to collect bodies instead of a rescue operation to bring his Marines home alive. Darkness transformed the forest into a different world. Renata moved through it with her night vision device mounted, the landscape rendered in shades of green phosphorescence. Every shadow became a potential threat or concealment. Every sound carried information about what moved in the night. She had been moving for 2 hours, paralleling the enemy's suspected patrol routes while maintaining a safe offset. Not running, not hiding, hunting. Her instructors had drilled this into her during countless exercises in similar terrain. When you're outnumbered and surrounded, the last thing the enemy expects is for you to move toward them rather than away. Through her night vision, she spotted the first sign of enemy activity. A faint light, poorly concealed, approximately 400 meters ahead. Someone had made a fire or was using an electric light source without proper blackout discipline. Amateur hour or arrogance. Either way, it gave her a target. Renata adjusted her approach angle, using a stream bed to mask her movement. The water was cold, soaking through her boots, but it provided a natural corridor that led within 200 meters of the light source. She moved at a glacial pace, each step taking 30 seconds, her eyes constantly scanning for sentries or observation posts. The light resolved into a small camp as she drew closer. 3 men sitting around a portable stove, heating something in a metal pot. Their rifles leaned against a nearby tree, within reach but not in hand. They were speaking in relaxed tones, the conversation of men who believed they were safe in their own territory. Renata settled into a prone position behind a fallen log and observed. These were not frontline fighters. Their gear was older, mismatched. One of them kept glancing at his watch, the nervous gesture of someone waiting for a shift change. This was a logistics position, probably guarding a supply cache or marking a route junction. She studied the surrounding terrain through her night vision, looking for other positions, other personnel. There, 30 meters to the left, another man, standing in the shadows. Sentry position, covering the approach from the valley. He was smoking a cigarette, the orange glow visible even without night vision. His weapon hung loose on its sling. 4 men total at this position, probably rotating guard duty while the others rested. Standard procedure for a static position in supposedly secure territory. They had won a victory today, captured American Marines, and now they were relaxed. Confident. That confidence was about to become fatal. Renata moved in a wide arc, coming at the sentry position from his blind side. She covered 50 meters in 20 minutes, moving only when the wind stirred the trees, freezing when the air went still. The sentry never looked in her direction. He finished his cigarette and immediately lit another. She was 10 meters away when he finally sensed something wrong. His head came up, eyes searching the darkness. His hand moved toward his rifle. Too slow, far too slow. Renata covered the final distance in 3 silent strides. Her knife came out in a fluid motion that had been practiced 10,000 times in training. The strike was precise, clinical, trained. The sentry made no sound as he collapsed. She lowered him quietly to the ground and dragged him further into the shadows. One down. She took his radio and clipped it to her vest, then moved toward the camp. The 3 men were still talking, still heating their meal, completely unaware that their perimeter had just been compromised. She circled to a position that gave her clear sight lines to all 3, then settled behind a large boulder. Her rifle came up smoothly. Through the night vision, the 3 men were clear targets. She controlled her breathing, let her heart rate settle, and began the familiar process of taking precise shots. The training took over, muscle memory, and countless hours on ranges around the world. The first shot broke the night silence. The man closest to the stove dropped without a sound. The other 2 were still processing what had happened when the second and third shots followed within 2 seconds. Professional, efficient, final. Renata did not move from her position. She remained perfectly still, watching and listening. If there were other positions nearby, they would have heard the shots. They would be responding. She counted to 100, then 200, controlling her breathing, ready to engage or evade as the situation demanded. Nothing moved. No voices called out. No additional personnel appeared. This had been an isolated position, and now it was eliminated. She waited another 5 minutes before moving to the camp. Working quickly, she gathered intelligence. Radio frequencies written on a scrap of paper. A hand-drawn map showing 3 other positions in the area. Food supplies that indicated this position had been established for at least several days. The enemy had been operating in this area long before Hayes and his team arrived. Renata took what she needed and cached the bodies in dense brush. She scattered the camp, making it look like the men had simply abandoned their position rather than been eliminated. It would buy her time before the enemy realized something was wrong. The captured radio crackled softly. A voice speaking in that language she was not supposed to understand, asking for a status check from this position. Renata listened, but did not respond. Let them wonder. Let them start to worry when their checkpoints went silent. She studied the captured map in the faint glow of her Redlands flashlight. 3 other positions marked within 2 kilometers. One appeared to be a command post based on the annotation. That would be where they were holding Hayes and the others, if they were still alive. That would be the center of enemy operations in this area. But hitting the command post directly would be suicide. She needed to weaken them first, create chaos, make them start looking over their shoulders. Her instructors had called it shaping the battlefield. You do not attack strength. You attack confidence. You attack morale. You attack their sense of security. Renata checked her watch. 21:47 hours. She had eliminated 4 enemy personnel without raising an alarm. The night was still young, and she had a map showing her exactly where to strike next. She moved away from the camp, heading toward the second position marked on the map. It was designated as an observation post overlooking the valley where the ambush had occurred. They would have communications equipment there. They would be reporting what they saw to the command post. They would be confident in their security. The terrain was rougher in this direction, forcing her to climb through broken ground and thick underbrush. She took her time, moving with the patience her training had instilled. Speed was not the goal. Precision was the goal. Surviving until morning was the goal. Making the enemy afraid of the dark was the goal. An hour later, she was in position overlooking the observation post. 2 men, both awake, both with night vision equipment. More professional than the logistics position. These were actual reconnaissance personnel who understood their job. They had good cover, good fields of fire, and they were alert. This would require a different approach. Renata settled in to watch them, to learn their patterns and procedures. She had all night. She had ammunition. She had training that none of these men knew existed. Most importantly, she had something they did not have. She had already killed 4 of their comrades without them even knowing it. The psychological operation had begun. By morning, the enemy would wake up to find positions silent and personnel missing. They would start to wonder what was happening in their secure territory. They would start to question whether they really controlled this ground. And somewhere in their command post, someone would begin to realize that the American woman they thought was captured or hiding in terror was actually doing something far more dangerous. She was hunting them. Renata checked her rifle and prepared for the next engagement. The observation post would be more difficult, but difficult was just another word for target-rich environment. Her instructors would have approved. They had trained her for exactly this situation, for exactly this kind of operation. Behind enemy lines. Alone. Outnumbered. And absolutely lethal. The 2 men in the observation post continued their watch, completely unaware that they had minutes left to live. Renata calculated angles, distances, environmental factors. Then she began the process of turning their security into their tomb. The night was far from over. Dawn broke cold and gray over the mountains. Morning mist clinging to the valleys like smoke from distant fires. Commander Petrov stood outside the command tent, drinking bitter coffee and watching his men prepare for another day of operations. Yesterday had been a complete success. 4 American prisoners, minimal casualties on his side, and the entire operation executed exactly as planned. His radio operator emerged from the tent, looking troubled. "Sir, we have a problem." Petrov turned. "What kind of problem?" "The logistics checkpoint at Sector 7 is not responding to radio calls. We have tried 6 times in the last hour. Nothing." "Maybe their radio died," Petrov said. "Send someone to check on them." The operator hesitated. "Sir, the observation post at Sector 3 also failed to check in at their scheduled time. That is 2 positions silent." Petrov felt a cold sensation in his stomach that had nothing to do with the morning temperature. 2 positions? When was the last confirmed contact? Logistics checkpoint reported normal status at 2100 hours last night. Observation post checked in at 22:30. Nothing since then. Send a patrol to both positions, Petrov ordered. Now, and give me status reports from all other units in the area. The operator hurried back into the tent. Petrov stared out at the mountains, at the mist-shrouded valleys where his forces were deployed. 2 silent positions could mean equipment failure, could mean incompetence, could mean his men had fallen asleep on duty and were about to receive severe discipline, or it could mean something else entirely. He thought about the American team they had ambushed. 3 prisoners secured, all wounded but alive and ready for interrogation. 1 confirmed kill at the ambush site. But there had been a 5th member of the team, the woman who had been on the ridgeline. They had searched for her throughout the afternoon and found nothing. His men had assumed she had fled into the mountains, that she was hiding somewhere terrified and alone, waiting for rescue that would come too late. Petrov had operated in these mountains for 3 years. He knew what happened to isolated soldiers in hostile territory. They died from exposure, from injuries, from making mistakes born of fear and desperation. They did not make two separate positions go silent in a single night, unless they were not ordinary soldiers. The radio operator returned. "Sir, patrol is moving to Sector 7 now. Should arrive in 20 minutes. All other positions report normal status." "Good," Petrov said. "Have the patrol proceed with caution and report immediately upon arrival." He went back into the command tent where his second-in-command, Lieutenant Volkov, was studying maps. "We have a situation," Petrov said, then briefed him on the silent positions. Volkov frowned. Equipment failure on two positions seems unlikely. But what else could it be? The American woman? One person could not take out two positions without raising an alarm. Maybe she did not take them out, Petrov said slowly. Maybe she simply slipped past them, and they are maintaining radio silence for their own reasons. That would be a serious breach of protocol, Volkov observed. Yes, it would, Petrov agreed. But until we know what actually happened, I want all positions on high alert. No one moves alone. Double the sentries. And give me an interrogation session with one of the American prisoners. I want to know more about this woman who has gone missing. Volkov nodded and began issuing orders. Petrov returned to the maps, studying the positions of his forces. Sector 7 was a supply cache with a small security detail. Not critical, but necessary. Sector 3 was the observation post overlooking the ambush site, positioned to provide early warning of any American rescue attempts. If someone was systematically taking out his positions, those would be logical targets. Isolated, relatively lightly defended, and their absence would not be immediately noticed, which suggested planning and intelligence rather than random chance or panic. His radio crackled. "Patrol leader to command. We are approaching Sector 7. No visual contact with checkpoint personnel yet." Petrov picked up the handset. "Proceed with caution. Report what you find." "Understood." 5 minutes of silence followed. Petrov forced himself to remain calm, to drink his coffee, to project confidence for the men around him. But that cold sensation in his stomach was growing stronger. "Command, this is patrol leader." His voice had changed, tension evident even through the radio static. "Checkpoint position is abandoned. Equipment scattered. No sign of personnel. We have drag marks leading into the brush. Search the area," Petrov ordered. "Find them." More silence. "Then, sir, we found them. All 4. They are dead. Looks like it happened last night. Professional work. Very professional." The tent went silent. Every man within earshot had stopped what they were doing to listen. Petrov kept his voice level. "Secure the area. Document everything. I am sending additional forces to your position. Do not touch anything until they arrive." He lowered the radio and looked at Volkov. "Get me the patrol moving to Sector 3. Double time. And increase security at all positions immediately." Volkov was already moving, barking orders into his own radio. Petrov pulled up a chair and sat down, his mind racing through tactical assessments. 4 men dead at an isolated position. Professional execution. No alarm raised. That required skills far beyond what a standard reconnaissance Marine should possess. The radio crackled again. Different voice, different patrol. "Command, Sector 3 observation post is compromised. 2 personnel dead. Similar execution to Sector 7. Equipment has been tampered with. Looks like intelligence was gathered." Petrov closed his eyes briefly. 6 dead. 2 positions eliminated. All in a single night, while his forces had been celebrating their victory over the Americans. Someone had moved through his area of operations like a ghost, killing his men, and vanishing without a trace. Sir Volkov said quietly, "This changes everything. This is not a frightened Marine trying to escape. This is someone conducting offensive operations." "I'm aware of that," Petrov said. "Give me everything we know about the American team we ambushed. Every piece of intelligence. I want to know who this woman is and what training she actually has." "We already reviewed their information," Volkov protested. "Standard reconnaissance unit. Nothing special about any of them." "Then we missed something?" Petrov snapped. "Standard reconnaissance Marines do not conduct solo offensive operations behind enemy lines. They do not eliminate 6 trained fighters without raising an alarm. They do not gather intelligence and disappear into terrain we control. So either our intelligence was wrong, or this woman is not what she appeared to be. Volkov pulled up files on his laptop. The missing American is Staff Sergeant Renata Kovac, age 29, Force Reconnaissance qualified. Service record shows standard career progression. Nothing remarkable. What about her training history? Petrov asked. Volkov scrolled through data. Mostly standard. Wait, there's a gap here. She spent 18 months at a training facility in Virginia. Very few details about what she actually did there. Just says advanced reconnaissance instruction. 18 months, Petrov repeated. That is a very long time for reconnaissance training. Maybe it was an instructor position, Volkov suggested. Or maybe it was something else entirely, Petrov said. Something that taught her to do exactly what she's doing right now. He stood and walked to the map, studying the positions they had lost. Both relatively isolated, both taken out in sequence during the night. If he was in her position, where would he strike next? The command post would be too heavily defended. But there were other positions, other vulnerable points in his network. All units, this is Commander Petrov, he said into the radio. We have a confirmed hostile operator in our area. 6 of our personnel are dead. This individual is highly trained and extremely dangerous. All positions are to implement maximum security protocols. No one moves alone. Sentries doubled. Patrols in groups of 4 minimum. Report anything unusual immediately. He paused, then added, This hostile is the American woman from yesterday's ambush. She's not captured. She is not hiding. She is actively hunting our forces. Treat this threat with extreme seriousness. Silence followed his transmission. Petrov could imagine the reaction at each position, the sudden fear and uncertainty replacing yesterday's confidence. Good. Fear would make them careful. Fear would keep them alive. But fear could also be paralyzing. And a paralyzed force was exactly what this American ghost warrior wanted. She was not just killing his men. She was destroying their morale, making them question their security, turning his controlled territory into a hunting ground where they were the prey. Petrov looked at Volkov. Pull back all outlying positions. Consolidate our forces into 3 defendable locations. She cannot attack us if we are concentrated and alert. That will leave large gaps in our coverage, Volkov observed. Better gaps in coverage than more dead soldiers, Petrov said. And send word to higher command. Tell them we need additional forces. Tell them we have a situation that requires immediate reinforcement. What about the American prisoners? Move them to the most secure location. Double their guards. If this woman is conducting a rescue operation, she will come for them eventually. When she does, we will be ready. Volkov nodded and began implementing the orders. Petrov returned to his coffee, now cold and even more bitter than before. Yesterday, he had commanded a successful ambush. Today he was scrambling to defend against a single operator who had killed 6 of his men in one night. Somewhere out there in those mountains, Staff Sergeant Renata Kovac was watching, planning her next move, choosing her next target. And Petrov had no idea where she was or when she would strike again. He only knew that morning had brought a very different kind of war than the one he had been winning yesterday. Renata watched the enemy consolidate their positions through her thermal monocular. They were pulling back from outlying posts, clustering their forces into 3 main defensive locations. Smart move. It would make them harder to pick off individually. But it also meant they were reacting to her, changing their operations based on fear rather than doctrine. She had spent the morning observing from a concealed position on a ridgeline overlooking the valley. No sleep. Sleep was a luxury she could not afford. Her body was running on training and controlled bursts of adrenaline, the kind of operational tempo her instructors had conditioned her to maintain for 72 hours or more. The captured radio continued to provide intelligence. Petrov, the enemy commander, was good. His tactical adjustments showed experience and sound judgment. He had recognized the threat and responded appropriately. But he was also broadcasting his fear through those very adjustments. His forces were on the defensive now, worried about ghosts in the forest, checking their perimeters constantly. Through the thermal scope, She identified what appeared to be the main command location. More personnel, better defensive positions, vehicles parked nearby. That would be where they were holding Hayes and the others, if they were still alive. She had heard nothing on a radio about prisoner status, which meant either they were being kept isolated or the enemy was maintaining strict communication security about them. Renata pulled out the captured map and compared it to her own tactical chart. The enemy's new defensive posture left certain areas unobserved. Routes she could use to move closer to their positions without being detected. They had traded coverage for security, and that trade created opportunities. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since yesterday morning. She retrieved an energy bar from her pack and forced herself to consume it slowly, mechanically. Food was fuel. Fuel maintained operational capability. The bar tasted like cardboard, but her body needed the calories. The radio crackled. Petrov's voice, issuing orders about patrol schedules and defensive sectors. He wanted patrols moving between the 3 consolidated positions, maintaining contact and mutual support. He was trying to eliminate the isolated targets she had exploited during the night. But patrols meant movement. Movement meant patterns. Patterns meant predictability. And predictability was just another kind of vulnerability. Renata checked her ammunition. She had expended 37 rounds during the night operations. That left 143 rifle rounds and all 45 pistol rounds. Enough for several more engagements if she chose her targets carefully. Her grenades remained unused, save for when a tactical situation required explosive force rather than surgical precision. She studied the terrain between her position and the enemy's consolidated forces. There was a stream that ran through the valley, winding between all 3 of their positions. It provided natural cover and a route that would keep her below most sight lines. Risky during daylight, but possible if she waited for the right moment. Movement caught her attention through the thermal scope. A patrol leaving one of the positions, for men moving in tactical formation toward another location. They were alert, weapons ready, scanning their environment constantly. These were professionals who now knew they were being hunted. Renata tracked them through her optic as they moved across the valley floor. They were taking a direct route, the shortest path between positions. Efficient but predictable. She noted the timing and direction, building a mental model of their patrol schedule. 30 minutes later, another patrol emerged from a different position, following a similar pattern. The enemy was establishing regular movement between their strong points, probably every 30 to 45 minutes. It gave them mutual support and communication while limiting exposure time in the open. A sound behind her made Renata freeze. Voices speaking in hushed tones. A search team moving through the ridgeline where she had positioned herself. They were sweeping the high ground, looking for observation posts, looking for her. She remained absolutely motionless, controlling her breathing to silence. The search team passed within 15 meters of her position, 3 men scanning the terrain with binoculars and thermal equipment of their own. One of them paused, looking directly at the cluster of rocks and brush where she lay concealed. Her hand moved slowly to her knife. If he approached, if he discovered her hide, she would have seconds to act before he could alert the others. The mathematics were simple. Kill him silently, then engage the other 2 before they could radio for help. Difficult but achievable. The man stared at her position for what felt like an eternity. Then his companion called to him, and they moved on, continuing their sweep pattern. Renata exhaled slowly, releasing tension she had not realized she was holding. That had been close. Too close. The search team disappeared into the forest. She gave them 20 minutes to clear the area, then began her own movement. This position was compromised now, or close enough that staying was foolish. She needed to relocate, find new observation points, continue gathering intelligence while avoiding the increasingly organized enemy search efforts. Renata moved laterally along the ridgeline, staying below the skyline, using terrain to mask her displacement. The forest was alive with enemy activity now. She could hear voices in multiple directions, patrols, and search teams combing the area. Petrov was throwing resources at the problem, trying to locate her through sheer weight of numbers. But numbers were not always an advantage. Numbers required coordination, communication, logistics. Numbers meant more people to keep track of, more potential for confusion, more opportunities for mistakes. And every man hunting for her was a man not defending his position, not watching his perimeter, not focused on his primary mission. She found a new observation point an hour later, this one with a better view of what appeared to be the main command location. Through her optic, she could see several men working around a large tent. Communications equipment, power generators, vehicles. Definitely a headquarters element. And they're barely visible through the scope. Two figures being moved between buildings under guard. Prisoners. Her teammates. They were alive. Renata felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by tactical calculation. Hayes, Chun, Martinez, possibly Davies if he had survived. They were being held at that location, which meant any rescue attempt would require direct assault on the most heavily defended enemy position. Suicide for a solo operator, unless she changed the conditions first. Her instructors had taught her about asymmetric warfare, about how a single skilled operator could create effects far beyond their individual combat power. You do not attack strength, they had said. You attack the enemy's ability to concentrate that strength. You attack their command and control. You attack their logistics. You attack their confidence and cohesion. Renata studied the command position through her scope, noting guard positions, fields of fire, routes of approach and egress. The enemy had set up good defenses, but good defenses were designed to stop frontal assault. They were less effective against infiltration, against someone who could wait for darkness and move like water through their perimeter. But that was a problem for tonight. Right now, she needed to continue gathering intelligence, continue learning the enemy's patterns and procedures. The captured radio provided tactical communications, but she needed to understand their operational rhythm, their decision-making process, their command relationships. A new voice came over the radio, different from Petrov. This one was agitated, reporting that another patrol had found evidence of American presence near the northern perimeter. Boot prints, disturbed vegetation, signs of recent observation. They were requesting permission to pursue. Petrov denied the request. All patrols were to maintain their assigned routes and schedules. No breaking formation to chase shadows. He was being smart, not allowing her to pull his forces out of position. Renata smiled grimly. Good commanders were always more interesting to fight than bad ones. Petrov was adapting, learning, trying to counter her tactics. That made the game more challenging. It also made his eventual defeat more significant. She checked the time. 1,300 hours. She had been operational for nearly 24 hours with no sleep. Her body was starting to send signals that it needed rest, but rest would have to wait. Tonight, she would need to be at peak performance for what she was planning. The patrol schedule continued throughout the afternoon. Every 30 to 40 minutes, teams moving between positions, maintaining contact, showing strength. It was a good system, hard to exploit during daylight hours. But night would bring different opportunities. Renata observed and recorded, building her mental map of the enemy's operations. She noted which leaders seemed competent and which seemed nervous. She identified the communications protocols they used. She watched how they handled their prisoners, what security measures they implemented, what routines they followed. Knowledge was ammunition. Every detail she learned was a potential advantage she could exploit. Her instructors had drilled this into her during hundreds of hours of surveillance training. The more you know about your enemy, the more precisely you can strike. And precision was everything when you were outnumbered 20-1. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Renata prepared for another night of operations. She had eliminated 6 enemy personnel last night. Tonight, she would do more than just eliminate isolated positions. Tonight, she would show Commander Petrov and his forces what it meant to be hunted by someone who had been trained specifically for this mission. The enemy thought they were defending against a desperate Marine trying to survive. They were about to discover They were being systematically dismantled by a weapon system they had not known existed. Darkness would fall in 3 hours, and then the real work would begin. Lieutenant Hayes sat with his back against a rough wooden wall of the storage building where they were being held. His left arm was in a makeshift sling, the bullet wound from the ambush throbbing with each heartbeat. Across from him, Chen lay on a thin blanket, his leg wound-bandaged but still seeping blood through the dressing. Martinez was in better shape, just a graze across his ribs, but the pain showed in his face every time he moved. Davies had not made it. Hayes had watched him go down in the initial volley, had seen the enemy finish him with precise shots while the rest of the team scrambled for cover. The memory played on loop in his mind, accompanied by the knowledge that he had led his team into that ambush despite Kovac's warnings. Kovac, the thought of her brought a complicated mix of emotions. Guilt that he had dismissed her tactical assessment. Hope that she had somehow escaped. Fear about what the enemy would do if they captured her. The guards had been talking about the American woman, about how important it would be to find her. Hayes understood enough of their language to catch the gist, even if he could not follow every word. The door opened, and 2 guards entered, followed by Commander Petrov. Hayes had learned his name from overhearing conversations between the guards. Petrov studied the 3 prisoners with the dispassionate gaze of a man assessing assets. Lieutenant Hayes, Petrov said in accented but clear English. "We need to talk about your missing sergeant." Hayes said nothing. Name, rank, and serial number. That was all he was required to give under the Geneva Convention. He doubted these people cared much about Geneva, but it was the only leverage he had. Petrov pulled up a chair and sat down. "You're wondering if she is alive, if she escaped, if she is hiding in the mountains waiting for rescue." He paused, studying Hayes' face. "I can tell you that she is definitely alive. In fact, she's been quite busy." Hayes kept his expression neutral, but his heart rate increased. Petrov noticed. "Last night, your sergeant killed 6 of my men. She eliminated 2 of my positions without raising an alarm. Very professional work. Very precise." He leaned forward. "So I am curious, Lieutenant. What kind of training does a standard force reconnaissance Marine receive that allows them to conduct solo offensive operations behind enemy lines?" Hayes met his eyes. "I have nothing to say." "Of course not," Petrov said. "But perhaps you will be interested to know that she is still out there, still conducting operations against my forces. We have found evidence of her movements, signs of her reconnaissance activities. She is watching us, Lieutenant, learning our patterns, planning her next strike." He stood and walked to the small window. "Your sergeant is not trying to escape. She is not hiding and waiting for rescue. She is hunting my men, which suggests training far beyond what a standard reconnaissance unit receives. Which makes me wonder what else you are not telling me about your team's actual mission here." Hayes remained silent. Inside, his mind was racing. Kovac was alive. Not just alive, but actively engaging the enemy. How was that possible? She was one Marine against an entire enemy force in their own territory. Even the best training would not overcome those odds, unless her training had been something extraordinary. He thought back to her personnel file, to that 18-month gap in her service record. Advanced reconnaissance instruction, the file had said, but 18 months for recon school was excessive. What if it had been something else? Something classified? Something she had never mentioned because she was not authorized to mention it? Petrov turned back to face him. "I have increased security around this location. I have consolidated my forces. I have implemented every countermeasure I can think of to protect against a solo operator. But your sergeant continues to operate with impunity in terrain I control. So I ask you again, what kind of training does she actually have?" Hayes said nothing. Petrov nodded as if he had expected that response. "Very well. You will remain here under guard while I deal with this situation. But understand this, Lieutenant. When I catch your sergeant, and I'll catch her, I will make sure you get to watch what happens to her. Perhaps that will motivate you to be more cooperative." He left, the guards following and locking the door behind them. Hayes closed his eyes, processing what he had just learned. 6 enemy dead. Kovac conducting offensive operations. The enemy commander rattled enough to interrogate prisoners about her background. Chun spoke from his position on the floor, his voice weak but clear. "LT, what the hell is Kovac?" "I do not know," Hayes admitted, "but I think we seriously underestimated her." Martinez shifted position, wincing at the pain from his ribs. "She tried to warn you about the ambush. Said the enemy patrol patterns were wrong. You shut her down." The words hit harder than any physical blow. Hayes had shut her down, had told her to stay in her lane, had followed the intelligence assessment instead of listening to the operator on the ground who was actually seeing the enemy disposition. And that decision had gotten Davies killed and the rest of them captured. "Yeah," Hayes said quietly. "I did. So what do we do now?" Martinez asked. "We wait," Hayes said. "We conserve our strength. And if Kovac manages to create an opportunity for us to escape, we damn well better be ready to move." "You think she is actually trying to rescue us?" Chun sounded skeptical. "I think she is doing whatever her training tells her to do," Hayes said. "And based on what Petrov just told us, her training is a lot more extensive than any of us realized." They fell silent, each man alone with his thoughts. Hayes stared at the wall, replaying every interaction he had with Kovac. She had always been competent but quiet, never pushing herself forward, never claiming credit or seeking attention, just doing her job with professional efficiency. What if that had been a cover? What if her entire persona in the unit had been carefully constructed to hide what she actually was? Hayes had read about special operations personnel who operated undercover, embedded in regular units for specific missions. Was that what Kovac was? A Tier 1 operator hiding in a force recon team? Outside, he heard increased activity. More guards being posted. Patrols moving through the compound. The enemy was afraid, and fear made people dangerous. But fear also made them make mistakes. Hayes thought about doctrine, about survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. Every Marine received the basics. But Kovac was apparently operating at a completely different level, using skills that went far beyond SEER school. She was not evading. She was not hiding. She was attacking. The door opened again. A guard brought in water and some food, basic rations that would keep them alive but not comfortable. He set it down without speaking and left, locking the door again. Hayes distributed the water to Chun and Martinez first, making sure they stayed hydrated. His own thirst could wait. As night fell outside their small prison, Hayes found himself thinking about what the next 24 hours might bring. Petrov seemed confident he could counter Kovac's operations. But Petrov also seemed genuinely concerned, which meant Kovac was having an effect far beyond just eliminating a few isolated positions. Chun fell into a fitful sleep, his body needing rest to heal. Martinez sat against the wall, keeping watch even though there was nothing to watch. Hayes remained awake, his mind working through tactical scenarios, trying to think like Kovac might be thinking. If she was conducting a solo rescue operation, she would need to create a massive distraction, something that would pull guards away from the prisoner holding area. She would need to identify escape routes, gather weapons and supplies, coordinate timing perfectly. It would require detailed intelligence and extraordinary skill. But if she could do it, if she could somehow pull off a rescue against these odds, it would be one of the most remarkable military operations Hayes had ever heard of. And it would mean his initial assessment of her had been catastrophically wrong. The compound outside grew quiet as midnight approached. Guard shifts changed. Patrols moved on their scheduled routes. Everything appeared normal, routine, secure. Hayes wondered if Kovac was out there somewhere, watching, planning, waiting for the right moment. He hoped she was. He hoped she had not gotten herself killed trying to fight an unwinnable battle. But more than that, he hoped that if she did try something, she would succeed. Because if she did not, if Petrov's forces caught her, Hayes knew he would spend the rest of his life regretting that he had not listened when she tried to warn him. The night deepened. Hayes eventually dozed, his exhausted body demanding rest even as his mind continued to race. In his dreams, he saw Kovac moving through shadows, a ghost warrior doing things that should not be possible. When he woke a few hours later, he wondered if the dreams were closer to reality than he had ever imagined. Outside, something changed. An urgency in the voices of the guards. Radio traffic increasing. Someone shouting orders. Hayes sat up, listening intently. Something was happening. Something had gone wrong for the enemy. Or something had gone exactly right for Kovac. He moved to the window, careful not to aggravate his wounded arm, and peered out into the darkness. In the distance, he saw lights moving, heard engines starting. The compound was mobilizing. Whatever Kovac had done, it had gotten their attention. Hayes smiled grimly. That was his sergeant out there, the one he had dismissed and underestimated. She had not given up. She had not run away. She was still fighting, still conducting operations, still being exactly what her training had made her. And Petrov's forces were about to learn what that actually meant. Renata moved through absolute darkness, her night vision painting the world in shades of green. She had been in position for 2 hours, studying the enemy's main compound from 3 different angles, memorizing every detail. Guard positions, patrol routes, communication patterns, the location where Hayes and the others were being held. Tonight would be different from her previous operations. Tonight, she was not hunting isolated positions. Tonight, she was going after the heart of enemy operations, and that required a different approach entirely. She had cached her assault pack 300 meters back, keeping only essential combat load. Rifle with 4 magazines. Pistol with 2 magazines. All 4 fragmentation grenades. The combat knife strapped to her chest. Nothing that would rattle or reflect light. Nothing that would slow her down when speed became necessary. The enemy had indeed increased security. Twice as many guards as the previous night. Patrols moving through the compound every 15 minutes. Floodlights illuminating key areas. It was a professional defensive posture that would stop most infiltration attempts. But most infiltration attempts were not planned by someone who had spent 18 months learning to do exactly this. Renata identified the weak point in their security. The power generator that ran those floodlights sat in a partially concealed position behind the main tent. It had guards, but they were focused outward, watching for external threats. They were not expecting someone who had already penetrated their perimeter. She had entered the compound 45 minutes earlier, moving during a guard shift change, when attention was divided and communication was focused on turnover procedures. A moment of vulnerability that lasted less than 3 minutes. More than enough time for someone who moved like water and thought like smoke. Now she lay concealed beneath a supply truck, 30 meters from the generator position. 2 guards stood nearby, both alert, both scanning their sectors. Professional soldiers doing their job competently. In another context, she might have respected that. In this context, they were obstacles between her and her objective. The patrol passed by on schedule, their boots visible beneath the truck. Renata counted to 60 after they disappeared, then moved. Low crawl, using shadows and terrain irregularities, closing the distance to the generator housing. The guards did not look down. People rarely looked down. She reached the generator and went to work. Her multi-tool made quick work of the fuel line connection. Not a full cut, just a strategic weakening that would fail under pressure. The generator would run for another 10 to 15 minutes, then sputter and die. And when it did, those floodlights would go dark. Renata melted back into the shadows, repositioning to a spot that gave her clear sight lines to multiple targets. Her rifle came up. Selector switch moved from safe to semi-automatic. She controlled her breathing, dropped her heart rate, and entered the mental state her instructors called Condition Red. Total focus, total commitment, no hesitation. The generator coughed, sputtered. The guards near it looked confused. One of them moved to check the machine. The floodlights flickered once, twice, then died. Darkness swallowed the compound, broken only by a few scattered emergency lights and vehicle headlights. Chaos erupted immediately. Voices calling out. Guards rushing to investigate. Someone shouting orders about getting backup power online. In the confusion, Renata moved. She covered 50 meters in seconds, reaching the building where the prisoners were held. 2 guards at the door, both looking toward the generator failure, trying to understand what had happened. They never saw her coming. Silent strikes, trained movements executed with perfect precision. Both guards down before either could raise an alarm. Renata grabbed keys from one of them and unlocked the door. Inside, she found Hayes, Chun, and Martinez staring at her in shock. "On your feet," she said quietly. "We are leaving." Hayes struggled up, favoring his wounded arm. "Kovac, what the hell? How did you—" "No time," she cut him off. Martinez helped Chun. "Follow me exactly. Do not make noise. Do not fall behind." Questions later. She led them out of the building, into the chaos of the darkened compound. The enemy was still focused on the generator, on restoring power, on understanding what had caused the failure. They were not watching for prisoners being extracted from under their noses. Renata guided her team through the shadows, using the routes she had memorized during her observation. Past the supply tent, between two parked vehicles, along the perimeter where darkness was deepest. Every movement calculated, every step planned. A guard appeared ahead of them, sweeping a flashlight beam across their path. Renata raised her rifle, but Hayes grabbed her arm. She looked at him, saw him pointing to an alternate route. She nodded and adjusted their path, avoiding the guard without engagement. Good tactical sense, even while wounded and exhausted. They reached the perimeter fence. Renata had cut a section earlier during her infiltration, hidden the gap with loose wire. She pulled it aside and motioned the others through. Martinez went first, half-carrying Chun. Hayes followed, moving awkwardly with his wounded arm. Behind them, someone shouted. The alarm had been raised. The prisoners were gone. Lights began coming back online as the enemy switched to backup generators. Renata grabbed Hayes and pulled him faster. "Move," she hissed. "Into the trees. Now." They crashed into the forest as gunfire erupted behind them. Rounds snapped through branches overhead. Someone had spotted them in the restored lighting. The entire compound was mobilizing, pouring out in pursuit. Renata stopped at a predetermined position, turned, and began laying down suppressive fire. Controlled pairs, targeting the lights and the silhouettes visible in their glow. Her rifle barked in rapid succession, forcing the pursuers to take cover. She dropped one magazine, loaded another, continued firing. "Go," she ordered Hayes. 200 meters north. There's a ravine. Follow it west. I cache supplies at a marked tree. Move. What about you? Hayes demanded. I will catch up. Move your team, Lieutenant. That is an order. Hayes hesitated for only a second, then grabbed Martinez and Chun and pushed them into the forest. Renata continued her covering fire, making each shot count, buying them time and distance. When her magazine ran dry, she loaded her last rifle magazine and displaced deeper into the trees. The enemy was organizing now. She could hear Petrov's voice shouting commands, coordinating the pursuit. They would come hard and fast, try to recapture the prisoners before they got too far. But they would be moving through terrain she had prepared, routes she had selected, ground she controlled. Renata reached her first prepared position, a cluster of rocks overlooking the route the enemy would most likely take. She set up her rifle and waited. Patience, timing, precision. The first pursuit element appeared, 8 men moving in tactical formation. Too aggressive, too focused on speed rather than security. Renata let them close to 30 meters, then opened fire. 3 men down in the first seconds. The others scattered, returning fire blindly into the darkness. She was already moving, displacing to her second position before they could coordinate a response. This was her terrain now, her rules, her timing. The pursuit continued, but with more caution. Petrov's forces had learned that rushing into the dark was deadly. They began moving more slowly, using suppressive fire, trying to locate her position through muzzle flash. Professional tactics from men who knew their business. But Renata had been trained by people who were better than professional. She had been trained by people who made professional look amateur. Every move was calculated to degrade enemy morale while preserving her ammunition and position. Every engagement designed to slow their pursuit without committing to a decisive fight she could not win. 2 hours later, she linked up with Hayes and the team at the cache point. They were exhausted, moving on adrenaline and determination. Chun was in bad shape, his leg wound bleeding again from the movement. Martinez was keeping him upright through pure will. Hayes looked at Renata with new eyes, seeing her clearly for the first time. "Who are you?" he asked. "Someone you should have listened to," she replied, checking Chin's wound. "But we can discuss that later. Right now, we need to put distance between us and Petrov before dawn." She redistributed her cache gear, giving Hayes a pistol and Martinez extra magazines for the rifle she handed him. Chin got water and medical supplies. Then she led them deeper into the mountains, away from the pursuit, following routes she had scouted during her solo operations. Behind them, the enemy compound was in chaos. Petrov had lost 6 men during the night, lost 3 prisoners he was supposed to be guarding, lost control of the situation to a single operator who had walked into his stronghold and extracted her team from under maximum security. The radio she still carried crackled with frantic communications. Petrov was reorganizing, calling in reinforcements, expanding the search. He was angry, and that anger was making him aggressive. Good. Angry commanders made mistakes. Renata kept her team moving through what remained of the night. They would need to reach friendly territory, make contact with American forces, and get Shun proper medical attention. But they were alive. They were free. And they had survived because one Marine had refused to give up, had refused to hide, had refused to be anything less than the weapon system she had been trained to become. Hayes walked beside her in the darkness, no longer questioning her decisions, no longer overriding her tactical assessments. He had learned his lesson. Sometimes the quiet, competent professional in your unit was more than they appeared to be. Sometimes they were exactly what you needed when everything went to hell. And sometimes they were what nightmares were made of for anyone foolish enough to become their enemy. Commander Petrov stood in the wreckage of what had been his command post, surveying the damage with cold fury. 3 dead guards, 2 buildings breached, 3 American prisoners gone, and 1 ghost of a woman who had walked through his defenses like they were not even there. Lieutenant Volkov approached cautiously, recognizing the dangerous edge in his commander's posture. "Sir, we have teams tracking them. They are heading northwest toward the border. We can still intercept before they reach American territory." Petrov turned to face him. "She walked into my compound, passed all our security, disabled our power, killed 3 more of my men, extracted her entire team. And you think we can intercept her?" Volkov hesitated. "Sir, she is wounded with her now. She cannot move as fast. We have superior numbers, and we know this terrain." "Do we?" Petrov asked quietly. "Because she seems to know it better than we do. She has killed 9 of my men in 2 days. 9, without suffering a single casualty herself. She has operated with impunity in territory we supposedly control. So tell me, Lieutenant, what makes you think we can stop her now?" "We have reinforcements arriving at dawn," Volkov offered. "A full platoon from the border garrison. We can surround the area where she is moving and close the net." Petrov walked to the map table, studying the terrain. The woman had been moving deliberately, choosing her routes with purpose. She was not running blindly. She was navigating towards specific objectives, probably rally points she had identified during her reconnaissance operations. "Pull back all pursuit teams," he said suddenly. "Sir?" Volkov looked confused. "Pull them back," Petrov repeated. "Establish a defensive perimeter around this position. No more chasing her through the mountains in the dark. That is what she wants. That is what she has been training us to do. But the prisoners are already gone," Petrov finished. "We're not going to get them back by rushing into ambushes she has prepared. We're going to consolidate, reorganize, and report this situation to higher command. Let them decide how to handle this." Volkov stared at him. "You're giving up?" "I am recognizing reality," Petrov snapped. "That woman is not a standard reconnaissance Marine. She is something else entirely. Something we were not prepared to face. And I am not going to lose any more of my men trying to capture someone who has proved she can kill us faster than we can find her." He pointed at the map. "She is heading for American lines. Once she crosses into their territory, she is their problem again. Our mission was to ambush the reconnaissance team and capture prisoners for intelligence. We accomplished part of that mission. The fact that one of them turned out to be a special operations asset we did not know about is not our failure. It is an intelligence failure at a much higher level. Volkov processed this, then nodded slowly. Yes, sir. I will recall the pursuit teams and establish the defensive perimeter. And get me a secure line to command, Petrov added. They need to know what we faced here. They need to update their intelligence assessments. Because if the Americans have more operators like her embedded in regular units, we need to completely revise our tactical approach. After Volkov left, Petrov remained at the map table, replaying the last 48 hours in his mind. The ambush had been perfect. His forces had executed flawlessly. They had captured 3 American Marines and killed a 4th. By every tactical measure, it had been a complete success. Until Staff Sergeant Renata Kovac had demonstrated that she was not like the others. He thought about the way she had identified their ambush before it was sprung, how Hayes had ignored her warnings, how she had survived while better-armed men with more support had fallen. Everything about her actions suggested training that went far beyond standard military reconnaissance. Petrov had been in special operations for 12 years. He recognized the signature of advanced training when he saw it. The woman moved like Spetsnaz, fought like Spetsnaz, killed like Spetsnaz. But she was American, which meant she had received equivalent training from whatever organization the Americans used for their most elite personnel. He wondered if Hayes had known. If the team leader had been aware that one of his Marines was actually a special operations asset operating undercover. Probably not, based on how Hayes had dismissed her tactical recommendations, which meant she had been deep cover, so deep that even her own team did not know what she was. That level of operational security suggested mission parameters beyond simple reconnaissance. She had been inserted with a regular unit for a specific purpose, probably expecting to maintain her cover unless circumstances required revealing her true capabilities. The ambush had forced her hand, had made her drop the cover and operate at her actual skill level. The result had been 9 of his men dead and a complete disruption of his operational control over this sector. One woman, operating alone, had achieved effects that would have required a platoon-sized element of regular forces. That was the definition of a force multiplier. That was what elite special operations personnel were designed to be. Volkov returned. Sir, pursuit teams are withdrawing. Defensive perimeter being established. And I have command on the secure line. Petrov took the radio handset and moved to a private area of the tent. He spent 15 minutes briefing his superiors on the situation, keeping his report factual and professional. Yes, they had lost prisoners. Yes, they had suffered casualties. But they had also identified an American special operations capability that intelligence had not previously documented. The response from command was predictable: anger at the prisoner loss, concern about the casualties, but also interest in the intelligence about American special operations tactics. Petrov was ordered to compile a complete after-action report, including detailed analysis of the woman's methods and capabilities. He agreed and ended the call. Then he sat down heavily in a chair, suddenly feeling every one of his 43 years. Command could have their report, but Petrov knew the real lesson here had nothing to do with tactics or intelligence assessments. The real lesson was simple. Never underestimate the quiet professional in the room. Never assume you know someone's true capabilities based on their cover identity. And never, ever ignore a tactical warning from someone who is actually on the ground observing the enemy. Hayes had learned that lesson the hard way. Petrov had learned it too, though his tuition had been paid in the lives of 9 good soldiers who had been unlucky enough to encounter a weapon system disguised as a standard Marine. Outside, dawn was breaking over the mountains. The American woman and her team were somewhere out there, moving towards safety. Petrov's forces were pulling back, consolidating, trying to salvage some operational security from this disaster. In another few hours, the Americans would launch their search and rescue operation. They would find their people alive and mobile, against all reasonable expectations. They would debrief them and learn what had happened here. And someone in American Special Operations Command would smile quietly, knowing that one of their assets had performed exactly as trained. Petrov stood and walked out of the tent, looking at the mountains where his men had hunted and been hunted. Somewhere in those trees, a woman was keeping 3 wounded Marines alive and moving toward friendly lines. A woman who had single-handedly destroyed his operational capability and killed nearly a squad of his soldiers. He had faced many enemies in his career: Chechen fighters in urban combat, Taliban insurgents in mountain warfare, well-trained militias backed by foreign powers. But he had never faced anyone quite like Staff Sergeant Renata Kovac, and he hoped he never would again. Volkov appeared beside him. "Sir, do you think they will make it? The Americans?" Petrov considered the question. "Based on everything I have seen her do, yes. She will get them home. She will complete her mission. And somewhere, whoever trained her will add this operation to the list of successful deployments." He turned to face his second in command. "We need to completely revise our security protocols, our patrol procedures, our defensive planning. Everything we did here, she countered. Everything we tried, she defeated. That means our doctrine has gaps that special operations personnel can exploit." Volkov nodded. "I will begin working on recommendations." "Do that," Petrov said, "because the next time we face someone like her, I want to be ready. I want to know how to fight that kind of enemy. And I want to make sure we never again mistake a special operations warrior for a standard reconnaissance Marine." They went back inside to begin the difficult work of damage assessment and operational recovery. Behind them, the sun continued to rise over mountains that had witnessed a masterclass in solo special operations warfare, a class that had been taught by someone most people would never know existed, someone who would return to being a quiet, competent professional in a standard unit, someone who would blend back into the background, waiting for the next time circumstances required her to reveal what she actually was: a weapon, a force multiplier, and a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person in any room is the one nobody notices until it is far too late. The sun was climbing toward noon when Renata heard the helicopters. She raised her fist, and the team stopped immediately, everyone dropping into whatever cover was available. They had been moving for 7 hours, covering ground at a pace that would have been impossible if Chun was not being carried between Martinez and Hayes. Renata pulled out her radio, the one she had not dared use until now. She switched to the emergency frequency and keyed the mic. Any American aircraft, this is Recon 3. For Marines requesting immediate extraction. Authentication code Whiskey 7 Victor. Over." Static answered her for a long moment. Then a voice crackled through, professional but clearly surprised. "Recon 3, this is Rescue 17. Authenticate Sierra 9 Bravo." Renata pulled the code card from her vest pocket, found the corresponding response. "Tango 4 Charlie. We have 1 urgent surgical, 2 walking wounded, plus 1 effective. Request immediate medevac." "Copy that, Recon 3. We have your position from your transmission. Birds inbound your location. ETA 12 minutes. Pop smoke when you hear us overhead." "Understood." Marking LZ with violet smoke. She lowered the radio and looked at her team. Hayes was staring at her with an expression that mixed relief, exhaustion, and something else. Questions he had not asked during the night march because staying alive took priority over understanding. 12 minutes, she told them. "Chun, you're going home." Chun managed a weak smile from where he lay against a tree. "Thanks, Sergeant, for everything." Martinez clapped her on the shoulder. "I do not know what you are, Kovac, but I am damn glad you were with us." Renata did not respond to that. She moved to a position where she could observe their perimeter, scanning for any sign of pursuit. The enemy had pulled back during the night, which had surprised her until she realized what Petrov must be thinking. He had recognized what she was and made the tactical decision to stop trading his men's lives for a slim chance of recapture. Smart commander. She could respect that even as she remained grateful for it. The sound of rotor blades grew louder. Renata pulled a smoke grenade from her vest, popped it, and threw it into the center of their small clearing. Violet smoke billowed up, marking their position for the incoming aircraft. 2 CH-53 helicopters appeared over the tree line, door gunners scanning for threats. One bird landed while the other maintained overwatch, its weapons systems ready to engage any enemy force. The doors opened, and a rescue team poured out, medics heading straight for Chun. A figure in different gear approached Renata. Flight suit with no name tags. Aviator sunglasses. The kind of anonymous operational presence that told her exactly what organization he represented. She had seen people dressed like that before at that facility that did not officially exist. Sergeant Kovac? He asked quietly. Yes, sir. Colonel Briggs wants to see you as soon as we get back to Granite. Private conversation, just you and him. Understood, sir. The medics had Chun on a stretcher and were loading him into the helicopter. Martinez and Hayes were being helped aboard by the rescue team. The anonymous officer gestured for Renata to board as well. She took one last look at the mountains, at the terrain where she had spent the last 48 hours conducting operations that would probably never appear in any official report. Then she climbed aboard and the helicopter lifted off, leaving the force behind. The flight back to FOB Granite took 30 minutes. Renata spent the time cleaning her weapons, methodically field stripping and wiping down each component. The familiar ritual helped her transition from operational mode back to something approaching normal. Hayes watched her work with a thoughtfulness that suggested he was finally putting pieces together. They landed, and the wounded were immediately transferred to the base medical facility. Renata was directed to a small office in the operations building where Colonel Briggs was waiting. The anonymous officer in the flight suit had vanished, probably already on his way back to whatever classified location he operated from. Briggs studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Close the door, Sergeant." She did. When she turned back, Briggs had pulled out a folder marked with classification levels that made standard secret clearance look like public information. "I got an interesting call this morning," he began, "from people who do not usually call me. They were very interested in your operational activities over the last 2 days. They wanted to make sure certain details remained appropriately compartmented." "Yes, sir," Renata said. Briggs opened the folder and read for a moment. "Says here you spent 18 months at a training facility that does not exist, learning skills that are not taught, for a mission profile that is not acknowledged. Then you were inserted into a standard force recon unit as deep cover, maintaining operational security even from your own team." "That is accurate, sir. And when Lieutenant Hayes led your team into an ambush, you dropped that cover and conducted solo special operations against numerically superior enemy forces, resulting in 9 confirmed enemy killed, 3 American prisoners rescued, and complete disruption of enemy operations in a disputed border sector." Renata said nothing. The facts spoke for themselves. Briggs closed the folder. "I need to know something, Sergeant. When you tried to warn Hayes about the ambush, when he overrode your recommendations, did you consider revealing your actual mission parameters, pulling rank or clearance to make him listen?" "No, sir. My cover was operational necessity. Revealing it for tactical advantage would have compromised future mission capability, even if it meant walking into an ambush. Even then, sir, I assessed that my actual skill set would allow me to recover the situation if things went wrong." "I was correct." Briggs leaned back in his chair. "Hayes is going to want answers. So are Chun and Martinez. They're going to have questions about who you really are and what you were really doing with their unit." "I understand, sir. What should I tell them?" Briggs pulled out another folder, this one significantly thinner. "Tell them you received advanced survival and combat training during that 18-month assignment. That the program was designed to create highly capable individual operators who could survive behind enemy lines. You do not mention the facility. You do not mention the organization. You do not mention that you were specifically inserted for a classified mission that may or may not be complete." He pushed the folder across the desk. "This is your new cover story. Memorize it. Use it when anyone asks questions. As far as the official record shows, you're a Force Recon Marine who received enhanced training and happened to use those skills to save your team. Nothing more." "Understood, sir. What about my actual mission parameters?" Briggs stood and walked to the window. "Your handler will contact you within 72 hours with instructions. Until then, you are a regular Marine who just conducted an exceptional rescue operation. You will be decorated. You will be interviewed. You will be the hero of FOB Granite for the next few weeks. Play the part, maintain your cover, and wait for further tasking. Yes, sir. He turned to face her. Off the record, Sergeant, that was some of the finest solo special operations work I have ever seen. Whoever trained you should be proud. You brought your team home against impossible odds. Thank you, sir. Dismissed. Renata left the office and stepped back into the afternoon sun. Other Marines were moving around the base, conducting routine operations, living ordinary military lives. She would rejoin them now, blend back into the background, become once again the quiet, competent professional nobody noticed. But first she needed to face Hayes and her teammates. They deserved some version of the truth, even if it had to be sanitized for security. They had earned that much by surviving. She found them at the medical facility. Chen was in surgery, but stable. Martinez had been treated and released. Hayes was getting his arm properly dressed by a medic. They all looked up when she entered. Kovac, Hayes said, "We need to talk." "I know," Renata replied. She pulled up a chair and sat down, preparing to deliver the cover story Briggs had authorized. But before she could start, Hayes raised his hand. "Wait," he said. "Before you tell me whatever classified briefing you were given, I want to say something. You tried to warn me. About the patrol patterns. About the ambush. I shut you down. I followed the intelligence assessment instead of listening to the operator on the ground. Davies died because I made that choice. The rest of us were captured because I made that choice." He paused, his expression heavy with responsibility. "I'm going to have to live with that. I'm going to write a letter to Davies' family and explain how my decisions got their son killed. But I want you to know that if I ever have the privilege of working with you again, I will never make that mistake twice." Renata met his eyes. "You made a reasonable decision based on the information available, Lieutenant. Davies' death is not your fault. It is the enemy's fault for planning an ambush, and warfare's fault for being inherently unpredictable." Martinez spoke up. "That is generous of you, Sergeant. But we all know you saw what was coming, and we did not listen. So how about you tell us what we need to know about your training, so we can be better at our jobs?" Renata spent the next 30 minutes delivering the authorized cover story. Advanced training program. Enhanced survival skills. Combat proficiency beyond standard curriculum. She gave them enough truth to satisfy their questions while holding back everything that actually mattered. They listened without interrupting. When she finished, Hayes nodded slowly. "So basically, you're what we all wish we could be if we had 18 months of the best training the military offers." "Something like that," Renata agreed. Martinez grinned. "Well, next time someone tells you to stay in your lane, Sergeant, feel free to remind them that your lane apparently includes rescuing entire teams from enemy strongholds." Renata allowed herself a small smile. "I will keep that in mind, Corporal." They talked for another hour, processing what they had experienced, beginning the long work of turning trauma into lessons learned. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with all of them, and Renata returned to her quarters. She lay on her bunk, staring at the ceiling, letting her body finally acknowledge how tired it was. 48 hours of combat operations. 9 enemy eliminated. 3 teammates rescued. Mission accomplished by any objective standard. But the real mission, the classified one Briggs had hinted at, remained incomplete. Whatever she had actually been inserted to accomplish, it was still waiting for her. Her handler would contact her soon with new instructions, new objectives, new tasks that required someone with her particular skill set. Until then, she would be Staff Sergeant Renata Kovac, Force Recon Marine, decorated hero, quiet professional. She would train with her unit. She would follow orders. She would blend into the background and wait. Because that was what people like her did. They waited in the shadows until the moment came when ordinary soldiers needed someone extraordinary. And then they stepped forward and did things that should not be possible. It was what she had been trained for. It was what she was. And somewhere in those mountains, Commander Petrov and his surviving forces would remember her for the rest of their lives. The ghost who walked through their defenses. The weapon they never saw coming. The reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody notices until it is far too late. 3 weeks later, Renata stood at attention in front of the entire battalion as Major Caldwell pinned the silver star to her uniform. The citation praised her exceptional valor, tactical brilliance, and dedication to her fellow Marines during combat operations in hostile territory. It was sanitized language that captured none of the actual details, but satisfied the requirement for public recognition. The battalion applauded. Hayes stood in the front row, his arms still in a sling, but healing well. Chun was beside him on crutches, out of the hospital, but with months of physical therapy ahead. Martinez stood at attention, pride evident in his bearing. They knew what the citation did not say. They understood what she had actually done out there. After the ceremony, there was a reception in the mess hall. Marines congratulated her, asked questions about the operation, wanted to hear war stories. Renata deflected most of it with modest responses about training and luck and teamwork. She was good at deflecting. 18 months at that facility had taught her many skills, and blending into the background was one of the most important. Hayes found her later, away from the crowd. "Walk with me, Sergeant." They moved outside into the evening air. The base was settling into its nighttime routine, Marines finishing their duty shifts and heading to chow or their quarters. Normal military life, the kind that continued regardless of what happened in those disputed mountain territories. "I got the after-action report back from Regiment," Hayes said. "They were impressed. Want to know if your training program could be expanded to more personnel." "What did you tell them?" Renata asked. "That the program was above my clearance level and they would need to direct inquiries through proper channels." Hayes paused. "Those channels went nowhere, I assume." "That would be my assumption as well, sir." They walked in silence for a moment. Hayes seemed to be wrestling with something, choosing his words carefully. "I've been thinking about what you said, about reasonable decisions based on available information, about Davies not being my fault." "Sir, let me finish," Hayes interrupted gently. "You were right that I made a reasonable decision, but you were also right before that when you tried to warn me. And I shut you down because I thought I knew better. Because I let rank and ego override the tactical assessment from the operator who was actually observing the enemy." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "That is the mistake I will never make again. Not just with you, but with anyone on my team. When someone sees something I do not see, when someone has information I need to hear, I am going to listen, even if it contradicts the intelligence brief, even if it makes me question my own judgment." "That is good leadership, Sir," Renata said. "It is survival," Hayes corrected. "Davies did not get to learn that lesson. I did, and I'm going to make sure his death means something by being a better officer because of it." They resumed walking. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Somewhere beyond those peaks was the territory where everything had happened, where 9 enemy soldiers had learned too late what it meant to underestimate someone based on assumptions. "Chun is being medically retired," Hayes said, changing the subject. "His leg is not going to heal well enough for active duty. Martinez and I are staying in. And you?" He looked at her questioningly. "I am staying with the unit for now," Renata said, "until I receive other orders." "Which could be any time," Hayes observed. "Because you're not really just a Force Recon Marine, are you? You are on loan from somewhere else, doing something we're not clear to know about." Renata did not confirm or deny. Some truths were better left unspoken. Hayes nodded, as if he had expected that response. "Well, for however long we get to keep you, Sergeant, I want you to know that you have my complete trust. If you ever need to pull rank on me for operational reasons, if you ever need me to follow your lead without question, you have that authority as far as I am concerned." "I appreciate that, sir, but I am just another Marine in your unit. I follow your orders and execute my assigned missions." "Right," Hayes said with a slight smile. "Just another Marine who happens to infiltrate enemy strongholds, eliminate superior forces, and conduct successful rescue operations solo. Totally standard." They reached the operations building where Hayes needed to check in for duty. He extended his hand and Renata shook it. "Thank you, Sergeant, for bringing us home, for not giving up when anyone else would have, for being exactly what we needed when we needed it most." "Just doing my job, sir." Hayes held her gaze for a moment longer, then nodded and went inside. Renata continued walking, heading toward her quarters. The base was quiet now, most Marines already settled in for the evening. She moved through familiar surroundings, just another face in the crowd, just another body in uniform. Her phone buzzed. A text message from an unknown number. Simple, direct, the way her handler always communicated. Stand by for tasking. Parameters incoming within 48 hours. Maintain cover in current assignment. Renata deleted the message and continued walking. So her actual mission was moving forward. Whatever the organization had inserted her to accomplish, the next phase was beginning. She would receive her instructions, execute her tasking, and continue operating under the cover of being a regular Force Recon Marine. She thought about the last 3 weeks. The interviews, the medal ceremony, the way other Marines looked at her now with a mixture of respect and curiosity. She had become visible in a way that was both necessary and uncomfortable. Visibility created scrutiny. Scrutiny threatened operational security. But that was part of the job. Sometimes you had to accept recognition and attention as the price of mission success. Sometimes you had to stand in front of a battalion and accept a medal while knowing the real story would never be told. Sometimes you had to be the hero everyone saw while remaining the weapon nobody understood. Renata reached her quarters and went inside. Her roommate was out on duty, leaving her alone with her thoughts. She sat on her bunk and pulled out a notebook, beginning to document everything that had happened in those mountains. Not for any official report. This was personal record, the kind of after-action review her instructors had taught her to conduct after every operation. What had worked? What had not? What she would do differently next time? What lessons could be extracted and applied to future missions? It was methodical, analytical, devoid of emotion. Just facts and tactical assessment. 9 enemy eliminated. 3 teammates rescued. 0 friendly casualties after initial ambush. Mission parameters exceeded. Cover maintained with authorized disclosure only. Handler contacted for next tasking. She wrote for an hour, filling pages with observations and analysis. When she finished, she would burn the notebook. No physical evidence. No paper trail. Just the lessons learned stored in her memory, ready to be applied the next time circumstances required her to reveal what she actually was. Outside her window, night had fully settled over the base. Somewhere in those mountains, Commander Petrov was probably still dealing with the aftermath of their encounter. Updating security protocols, revising tactical doctrine, training his forces to watch for threats they had not previously imagined. Good. That was how you survived in this business. You learned from your mistakes. You adapted to new threats. You never assumed you knew everything about the enemy sitting across from you. Renata had learned those lessons at that facility that did not exist, had absorbed them during 18 months of the most intensive training the American Special Operations community offered, had proved them in 48 hours of solo operations that would never appear in any history book. And now she would go back to being Staff Sergeant Renata Kovac, quiet professional, competent Marine, someone who blended into the background and did her job without seeking attention or recognition. Until the next time circumstances required something different. Until the next moment when ordinary soldiers needed someone extraordinary. Until the next mission that demanded skills most people did not know existed. She would be ready. She would be watching. She would be exactly what she had been trained to be. A weapon system disguised as a regular Marine. A force multiplier hiding in plain sight. A reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person in any situation is the one nobody notices until it is far too late. And if you enjoyed this story of tactical excellence and hidden strength under impossible pressure, drop a comment about your favorite moment, or tell us if you have ever witnessed someone reveal unexpected capabilities when it mattered most. Maybe you know someone who is more than they appear to be. Maybe you have your own story of underestimation and revelation. Because the truth is, we are all capable of more than we show. We all have depths that only emerge under pressure. We all carry potential that waits for the right moment to manifest. Renata Kovac knew that truth better than most. She had been trained to embody it. And somewhere out there, other quiet professionals were doing the same thing. Blending in, waiting, ready to step forward when ordinary was not enough and the situation demanded extraordinary. The lights went out across the base as taps played over the loudspeakers. Another day ending. Another night beginning. Renata lay on her bunk and closed her eyes, allowing her body to finally rest after weeks of operational tempo. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new missions, new opportunities to be exactly what she had been created to be. But tonight, she could rest. She had earned it. She had brought her team home alive. She had completed her mission. And that was enough.